It begins with an impossible number, 300 ships, a fleet so vast the sagas say it choked the horizon, a forest of masts and dragon prows sailing to devour a kingdom. This was the last great Viking host, carrying an army of 10,000 warriors, and against them stood one man, an English king 200 miles away, with his army disbanded. The question was not if the Vikings would conquer England, but how quickly. The odds were overwhelming, the outcome seemed certain. But history is rarely so simple. This is the story of an impossible march, a legendary last stand, and a battle so brutal it ended an entire age in a single bloody day. The year is 1066. In the cold halls of Westminster, King Edward the Confessor, the last of the ancient line of Wessex, lies dying. He leaves no son, no clear heir. And in that vacuum, three of the most dangerous men in Europe see their chance. In England, the powerful Earl Harald Godwinson, the king's right-hand man, claims Edward named him successor with his dying breath. In Normandy, Duke William, a man of iron will and ruthless ambition, claims the throne was promised to him years before, and he has the Pope's blessing to take it by force. And from the frozen north, a third shadow falls. Harald Sigurdsson, king of Norway. History would give him a sharper name, Hardrada, the hard ruler. This was no mere king. He was a figure torn from legend, a giant of a man who had spent his life in the crucible of war. He was the living embodiment of the Viking spirit, and he believed the crown of England was his by right of an old Viking claim. His claim was the weakest, but his army was the strongest. He needed only a pretext, an invitation. That invitation came from a place of bitter hatred. Tostig Godwinson, King Harald's own brother, exiled from his lands in the north, Tostig burned for revenge. He sailed to Norway and knelt before Hardrada, promising that England was ripe for the taking. The family feud had now become a geopolitical crisis. The ambition of a king and the vengeance of a brother had combined to unleash the full fury of the north upon England. The Viking Age was about to reach its violent, bloody climax. To understand the storm that was coming, you must understand the man who led it. Harald Hardrada was a story in himself. As a boy of 15, he was wounded and exiled after fighting for his brother, the King of Norway. But exile did not break him. It forged him. He journeyed east, to the glittering heart of the world, Constantinople. There he joined the Varangian Guard, the elite axe-wielding bodyguards of the Byzantine Emperor. These were the deadliest mercenaries on earth, and Hardrada rose to command them. For 15 years he fought on every border of the empire. He battled Saracen pirates in the Mediterranean, crushed rebellions in the Balkans, and campaigned in the Holy Land. He became a master of strategy, a veteran of 100 battles, and amassed a fortune so vast it was shipped back to Kiev in barrels. In 1046 he returned to Norway not as an exile, but as a king, richer and more feared than any ruler in the north. He had spent a lifetime winning. He did not know how to lose. In the late summer of 1066 his great invasion fleet landed in the north of England. The first English resistance came from the local earls Edwin and Morcar. At a place called Fulford just outside the city of York, the two armies met. The English held a strong position, their flanks guarded by a river and a marsh. But Hardrada, the master tactician, saw not a fortress but a trap. He feigned weakness on one wing, luring the English into a charge. As the English surged forward, Hardrada sprung his trap. He swung his best warriors around their flank and smashed into them. The English line buckled, then broke. Pinned against the marsh with nowhere to run, the retreat became a slaughter. The sagas grimly boast that the Vikings could cross the swamp on the bodies of the dead. The Battle of Fulford was a devastating English defeat. The city of York surrendered. Hardrada was now the master of the north. His victory felt absolute. While Hardrada celebrated, news of the invasion was flying south. It reached King Harald Godwinson in London. He faced a nightmare. His southern army was disbanded, and a victorious Viking host was digging in hundreds of miles away. To wait meant losing his kingdom piece by piece. To march was a desperate gamble. Harald gambled. He gathered his personal guard, his elite housecarls, and began one of the most astonishing forced marches in military history. He drove his army north from London, covering nearly 200 miles in just 4 days, an average of almost 50 miles a day. For a medieval army, this was not just fast, it was impossible. The Vikings had no scouts out. They assumed any response from the south would take weeks. They had no idea that a phantom army was moving towards them, an army of mounted infantry who rode like the wind and fought like demons. King Harald wasn't just marching, he was hunting. The morning of September 25th was bright, clear, and unseasonably warm. So warm that many of the Viking warriors had made a fatal mistake. They had left their heavy mail armor back at their ships, 15 miles away. They were expecting a day of politics, of collecting hostages from the city of York. They were scattered, disorganized, lounging in the sun by a river near a narrow wooden bridge called Stamford Bridge. Their guard was completely down. It began as a shimmer of dust on the western road, a low rumble that grew into the thunder of thousands of pounding hooves. The dust cloud resolved into a sea of steel, the sun glinting off a forest of spear points and helmets. Panic erupted. This was not a party of hostages. This was an army. This was the English king. From total relaxation, the Vikings were thrown into a desperate scramble for their lives. They needed time. Time to form a shield wall. Time for their armored comrades to run from the ships. And only one thing could buy them that time: the bridge. As the English army surged forward, ready to pour across the river and annihilate them, they were stopped dead by an incredible sight. One man, a single giant Norwegian warrior, had taken his stand in the middle of the narrow bridge, his massive Dane axe held ready. The English charged, but the bridge was a perfect killing ground. They could only come at him a few at a time. With devastating swings of his axe, the lone Viking held the pass. The English chronicles themselves, written by his enemies, record his valor in awe. They claim he single-handedly cut down 40 Englishmen. He seemed invincible, a hero from the sagas made real, but it could not last. Frustrated, the English resorted to cunning. One soldier found a small boat floated under the bridge and thrust his spear up through the wooden planks, impaling the giant from below. The hero staggered and fell. His legendary stand was over, but he had bought his king precious vital minutes. The human dam had broken. The full flood of the English army poured across the bridge and smashed into the hastily formed Viking shield wall. The sound was deafening. The splintering of shields, the shriek of steel on steel, the screams of the dying. It was a brutal, grinding, shoving match with axes and spears, but the Vikings were at a terrible disadvantage. Unarmored, every English blow that slipped past a shield was a death sentence. In the heart of the chaos fought King Harald Hardrada himself. The sagas say he entered a berserker rage, his great sword a blur of motion, cutting down any who dared face him. He was a king leading from the front, a terrifying, awe-inspiring warrior, but as the battle wore on, a stray English arrow flew through the chaos. It struck the Viking king in the throat. He fell to the ground, the lifeblood of the last great Viking warlord draining into the English soil. A terrible silence must have fallen over the Norse lines. The death of a king could shatter an army. As the shield wall began to collapse in despair, a new sound was heard from the east, a roar of fresh war cries. The reinforcements from the ships had finally arrived. They were led by Eystein, one of Hardrada's finest commanders. His men had just run 15 miles in full armor. Exhausted but furious, they crashed into the English flank in a desperate, heroic charge that became known as Orr's Storm. For one last, glorious moment, it seemed the tide might turn. The Vikings rallied. The banner was raised again. But heroism cannot overcome exhaustion. Some of Orr's men collapsed and died from the strain before they even reached the fight. The fury of their charge faded. The better rested English absorbed the shock and pushed back. In the renewed fighting, Orr himself was killed. That was the final blow. With their king dead, their leaders gone, the will to fight shattered, the shield wall disintegrated. The battle became a rout, and the rout became a slaughter. The Viking defeat was absolute. Of the great fleet that had brought them to England, only 24 ships were needed to carry the few broken survivors home. The Norwegian army had been erased. King Harald Godwinson had won one of the most stunning victories in English history. Chroniclers would later claim the battlefield was white with bleached bones for 50 years. He had faced down and destroyed the last great Viking invasion. The Viking Age, 3 centuries of fire and fury, had ended here in the fields of Yorkshire. But for the victor there was no time to celebrate. His army was battered, exhausted, and had suffered grievous losses, especially among his elite housecarls. And as he rested his weary men, disastrous news arrived. 3 days after his victory at Stamford Bridge, William of Normandy had finally landed his army on the south coast. Harold had won the battle, but the war for his kingdom was just beginning. He had to turn his tired soldiers around and force them on another punishing march south, to face a fresh and powerful enemy. He would march to his destiny, to another hill and another battle near a small town called Hastings. The Battle of Stamford Bridge is a story of tragic irony. It was the greatest victory of an Anglo-Saxon king, and the very thing that sealed the doom of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom. The courage and endurance that won the day in the north were the same resources desperately needed, and tragically absent, 19 days later in the south. Today, a stone monument and a striking sculpture of a Viking warrior stand in the village of Stamford Bridge. Quiet reminders of that bloody day. It marks the place where one age ended and another was violently born. The story of 1066 is not one battle but two, and the first bloody chapter was written here. If you want to understand the forces that shaped our world and the incredible human stories behind them, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. Join us next time as we follow King Harald on his final march south for the conclusion of this epic story at the Battle of Hastings. Thank you for watching.